we have to be focused on where's the profitability, what are the margins, what are we taking home, and how much stress is involved in getting to the next place. And are we as leaders in a place in our life that that's what we're ready for? Because if we're not, it's okay to stay in a comfortable, profitable state. If this is if these are the years that you're starting a family, and over 5 years you're going to have 3 children, maybe that's not the time for super ambitious, growth goals. And it's okay to say, as a business leader, this is a season. And in this season, we're not focused on tripling sales. We're focused on lowering cost and increasing profitability. These are not very popular things to talk about. Everybody just wants to see these really huge revenue numbers. But when we look at our life and we look at our business, how does our business fit into our life? And when we look at it that way, sometimes just tightening up where we are is absolutely the answer. And it makes millionaires every single day.
Panda Ludwig, you are very, very welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
I'm really excited to be here. We have so much to talk about. So hopefully we can get it all in one podcast.
Yeah, well, I sincerely hope so, but we can certainly do multiple podcasts if necessary. I was thinking about this conversation as I was just setting up earlier. I've been in business. I'm a little bit older than you, a lot. I've been in business for about 40 years. I've been um, in several businesses. I've built businesses. I have failed in businesses. I've had great investments. I've had miserable investments. And it struck me looking back over all those years that being an entrepreneur is a stressful endeavor. Whether you like it or not, it's a stressful endeavor. I suppose life is a stressful endeavor. And it seems the question is how we manage that. So I guess that's kind of an area of expertise. So I'd love you to reflect on that, share your thoughts on that, but you might also tell us how you came to that aha moment that you need to have balance in your life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and congratulations. You said you've been in business 40 years. So that's wonderful that you started your first business when you were 5 years old. That's
Yes, that's right.
congratulations
5, yeah,
to you.
yeah.
That's
I was a millionaire
wonderful.
by 6 and
Congrats. I'm so honored to know such a successful at 5 years old
yes,
young man.
yes, yeah.
Uh, but my journey, not unlike yours, was, starting multiple businesses. My father was a serial entrepreneur, and I sort of didn't know any better, right? It just, you get an idea and you say, "Oh, I'll
Mm,
start a business," and it's very normal when you come from an entrepreneurial family, and so I did, and I, was launching these multiple businesses and learning a lot, and then I came into a company that really filled a big gap. And so, that's the name of the game when you're launching a business is, see where there's a need and fill the need. And so that business, it really took off. It was sort of an accidental,
mm,
people think you're going to have this, oh, I had this idea and then I had this 5-year plan. Not all businesses start that way.
mm.
I had the idea, I filled the need, and next thing I knew, I needed to hire more staff, and I opened an office and then a bigger office, and it just grew and grew, and I was really focused on increasing revenues. We were increasing revenue 50% year over year, and that
Wow.
pattern continued, right, which is just sort of unheard of. And
Mm,
I was quite proud of the work that I was doing, not realizing that it was sort of all consuming.
mm,
And until I started to notice, I was quite tired, and sometimes my emails would be a bit jumbled when I'd go back and read them. I'd go back and kind of
mm,
check the correspondence to,
yeah.
catch up maybe before a meeting or something. And I started noticing these small things, but I just, oh, it's been busy. I'm just a little bit tired. But those sort of things continued to pop up more and more until finally there a day came where I was at a somewhat normal doctor's appointment, and they were checking my heart, and the doctor said to me, "Do you understand that if you don't slow down, you're going to die?" and I was in my late 30s at that point. And then the doctor went on to say, "You have the heart of a 60-year-old woman." And I don't think she was meaning to say that I was, sort of the grandmotherly,
Yeah.
big heart type, but that's not the
It
sort of
wasn't
heart
good
we're
news,
talking.
yeah.
Yes, yes, it wasn't a lovely compliment. She's
Mm,
saying, "You're burning through your resources at
wow.
record speed, and this cannot continue." And I wish I could say that at that point, I walked out of that doctor's office and I completely transformed my life. But, we entrepreneurs can be a bit stubborn and think we're a bit invincible at times, right? Because, the show must go on.
Yeah.
And when we've built something and it relies on us, or we think that it relies on us, which is not always the truth, as I learned, that we must keep going. And so it still took a little bit more time. That was the aha moment, the where my eyes started to be opened, but I still took a bit more time before I essentially made the changes that needed to be made. So I got to the point that I was no longer able to work, and eventually got a quite severe medical diagnosis. I exited that company. Fortunately, I had built a company that was ready to sell, and so I was able to sell it and undergo 2 years of medical treatment. And so now that I've returned, I still do my work of interpreting financial data into operational intelligence and help companies with their profitability. But there's a little bit more to it now that I'm helping business owners with, which is building companies that they love and building companies that are taking them to the life that they want, rather than just let's hit these revenue goals. So my life transformation has allowed me to transform other lives while transforming businesses. So it's an exciting place to be. And I think it's important for me to be a bit vulnerable and share this story, because I think that I think I can prevent some other people from getting to the same point. We don't have to get to that point. So
Mm.
that's what I'm here to share.
I think the nature of entrepreneurship when you have that drive, and by the way, you can have that drive and not be an entrepreneur. It could be in any field, but you just
Absolutely.
have you just
Yes.
have that you just have that drive to do something. Could be coach a team, raise a family.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I think we get a buzz from that drive. It's why we do it. There's a buzz. There's an excitement. Um, but it seems we let that excitement override our natural instinct, and we just seem to push, push. And that's what I witness with most entrepreneurs I meet. They just seem to push for that goal of success and growth, and everything else happens at the back if there's time for it.
When you were talking about, could be entrepreneurs, or you could be in any line
Yeah.
of work. And so if we collectively call people like us high achievers, or people with achiever mindset, which I
Mm.
think is a
Yeah.
wonderful thing to have. We're not certainly not knocking achievement, but I find, or at
Mm.
least in my own life, I recognize that that achievement is very much like a drug. It's something that we can become a bit addicted to, and it starts at a really early age, because we find, oh, we've done well in school, and so then we get awards, and I won all the awards in school, and that's much the nature of the type of people that we're talking about. And I won the sports
Mm.
awards and the music scholarships, and right, anything that we set out to do, we are going to do it 100%. And so we start to see, oh, as a child, adults recognize us for this work that we've done, or the
Yes.
teachers, or our parents,
Mm.
or our coaches, people that we look up to commend us for this achievement. And so we start to recognize, oh, and it's natural, it's a natural instinct. Oh, when I do this, people like me. People
Mm.
accept me. People are proud of me. And isn't that human nature to
Of course.
desire those things? And that's a wonderful trait. But as we grow into adults, we tend to seek the same thing, and each achievement then is that drug, it's that hit, and it does give us that bit of buzz. But we're always looking then for, just like actual drugs, we need a little bit more, and we
Mm.
need it a little bit more often. And the end result can be, and that's why I call it the achievement drug, much like abusing drugs for our physical body, where we'll seek out a drug to our own detriment. The achievement drug can have the same impact, where we continue to seek out that next buzz, that next high, to our own detriment. And so when we start to recognize that, growing my company 50% year over year, achievement, wonderful. I won the awards for that too, right? I love my awards. But when we recognize, oh, there's a point at which this is enough, and we're steady and we're stable and we're profitable, and let's stay here and be stable, and let me bring in some of these managers. I'm going to delegate more so I can
Mm.
detach some from my business. When that becomes the goal rather than grow, 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 scale, 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 sometimes that is actually what we're seeking. It's the life that we want, but it's always, well, after the next thing, or after the next phase, after the next launch, after the next whatever. And next thing we know, we're retiring and still working in that same pace. So that's a big part of, kind of flipping to the financial side. I really think of the year 2024, I've been calling it the scale fail year, because we had the COVID years, and that was
Mm.
survival years. And then we kind of had stabilization in 2023. And then 2024, everything we were hearing about was scale. I mean, that word, just every magazine, everything was about scaling. And I saw through that phase that people were pushing so hard to scale that they actually were reducing profitability because they were doing so many
Mm.
things to grow. And so when we look at it from a financial standpoint, sometimes scaling should be more calculated. And then when we look at it from our personal lives, we have to recognize that sometimes scaling isn't actually what we want. We just think that it's what we're supposed to do because we hear it all the time and we think it's expected of us as a business owner.
It's interesting. I had dinner about 3 or 4 weeks ago with an entrepreneur who I didn't know prior to this, and we had a conversation. And he was telling me about the size of his business, and I was, it sounded like a great business. But the conversation went on, and he had several glasses of wine, and I drink very, very little. So what happens in these conversations is I'm remaining entirely sober, someone else is less. So the information begins to filter.
Right,
So I
right.
realized two things about his business. One was he was talking about a business, he was talking about a revenue line that sounds impressive, and sounded bigger than my own business, and you kind of go, oh, very interesting. And then he revealed the margin he was operating off, and I'm going,
Mm.
and I'm thinking, well, that's half what my business operates on. How could
Yeah.
you? I mean, I'm doing the maths because his business was kind of similar to mine. I'm doing the maths and thinking, like, I couldn't operate at those level of margins. I'd be barely breaking even. So as the evening went on, I realized he was making, on top line impressive, but he was making very, very little profit. That was the first thing. The second thing was he had an incredible plan to scale the business. Um, I mean, and it was a great plan. It was risky. All great plans are risky,
Sure.
but he was burning through cash trying to achieve that. And I think this goes back to the point you're making, this obsession with scaling and actually damaging a very good business. To me, there was no balance in the approach. And I felt he might end up building a very big business, or he might kill a very good business.
I'm really happy you brought that up because that's exactly what I'm seeing across multiple entrepreneurs in multiple industries, and it's a mindset bit. And I teach a workshop on this, and we talk about different areas of business, and I've given them all names. And one thing I talk about is something I call ego debt, which is where we're willing to go into debt to fund a dream, essentially. Or
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes it's, I'm willing to go into debt to scale, when because it takes money to make money, which is
Mm.
true. You often have to
Of course.
invest to be
Yeah.
able to scale. You have to hire people, and they're not yet helping to produce income immediately. But so often that process seems to involve a great deal of our own ego, that we are competing, or we are believing that we have to get to this certain point, when really truly the wisest decision makers recognize that if the margins aren't great, like you were just talking
Mm.
about, on this small level, then actually the best thing to do is to fix the margins, to improve
Yeah.
where we are,
Yes.
and then duplicate that process incrementally over time. But
Yeah.
that's not what we're hearing. All of 2024, everything was about scale, grow, scale, scale, scale. And it just lacked the wisdom of what we actually see in successful companies, which is
Mm.
it's very calculated. We're looking at costs, we're looking at margins, and we're making it work where we are before we attempt to grow. And that's why I call that 2024 the scale fail year, because so many businesses did fail in their
Mm.
scaling process. And so many of them aren't around anymore, because scaling can be so expensive. If it
Mm.
doesn't work and it's not done with a proper strategy and calculation, it will put a business under. And I had a client that I worked with for years that had a revenue goal in mind, a number, and it was a large number, and it was
Mm.
an obtainable number. But when I did projections, what I recognized is, and I'll just use some round simple numbers, but their profitability, when they were staying in the $5 to $7 million revenue range, their profitability was actually greater than at the $10 million range,
Mm.
because of what they needed to do at 10 million to sustain that. So then to go
Yeah.
from 10 to 20 million, the investments involved, they didn't have the cash flow, but they
Mm.
actually would have had the same bottom line, the same net at 20 million as they would at 7 million, but with a lot
Mm.
more headaches, right? Like, that's more
A lot
staff,
more
more
complexity.
offices. Yeah, more
Mm.
everything for the
Mm.
exact same amount of money. And I presented that to the business owner and said,
Mm.
"Look, this is what the numbers say. Let's
Mm.
just stay at this 5 to 7.
Mm.
You're doing well. You've bought a lovely house. Your kids are in private school. Like,
Yeah.
you're able to travel with your family. Like, let's not double what you're doing." And he said, "No, it's really, I have to get to that number,
Mm.
because some competitors were
Mm.
at that number, and that's what was important." And unfortunately, that business didn't survive because of that mindset. They didn't have the funding to scale, but went ahead anyway with, fingers crossed, and it'll work because we got
Mm.
here quickly. We'll get to the next one. And so it's recognizing, where does that come from, and we high achievers can often be that way. Another trend I see, and I don't know if it's happening as much there as I see it in the US, but it's become, even though I have a CFO background and my whole career has been involved with money, right? Managing money in some way,
Mm.
I still
Mm.
find it a bit taboo to talk about money, which is kind of strange.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's that or to brag about money, perhaps, is what I find to be a bit distasteful. But it's become very popular on LinkedIn for people to post their revenue.
Mm.
"Oh, this is how we went from 10 million to 20 million in
Mm.
90 days, and we'll help you too," right? That's sort of the norm. And what it's done is it's put in the minds of business owners that it's possible, which I believe in. You can't hit goals if you don't believe they're possible. There's no point in even making a goal if you don't think it's possible. But all they're hearing is the revenue number,
Mm.
and no one is talking about their profitability. They might
Mm.
have gone from 10 million to 20 million, but just like the gentleman who had a few more glasses of wine than you did, it's
Mm.
not about that top number. We have to be focused on, where's the profitability, what are the margins, what are we taking home, and how much stress is involved in getting to the next place, and are we as leaders in a place in our life that that's what we're ready for, Because if we're not, it's okay to stay in a comfortable, profitable state. If this is the, if these are the years that you're starting a family, and over 5 years you're going to have 3 children, maybe that's not the time for super ambitious, growth goals. And it's okay to say, as a business leader, this is a season. And in this season, we're not focused on tripling sales. We're focused on lowering cost and increasing profitability. These are not very popular things to talk about. Everybody just wants to see these really huge revenue numbers. But when we look at our life and we look at our business, how does our business fit into our life? And when we look at it that way, sometimes just tightening up where we are is absolutely the answer. And it makes millionaires every single day.
I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and I can tell you right now that what you're saying is close to blasphemy. I mean,
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, yes.
I mean,
I'm not a very popular gal.
no, you got to be careful now. I hope you're a personal bodyguard. And
Right.
it's interesting. I know it's blasphemy, but it's very very interesting for me because I actually don't remember the last time I had a conversation with someone where they actually said, you've a 5 or 7 million euro business. You're probably doing really well at that. You've a nice home, all of these things. You know, when is enough? I think it was Harvard or one of the big colleges did a study a number of years ago where they chose people of varying net worth and asked them all, when would they have enough? And the answers are obvious. They ask people at a million, they say when I get to two, two is when I
Right.
get to three, five is when I get to seven, seven is when I get to 10. And everyone, the goal of what would be enough was a million or 2 million ahead. And the question that, as I'm listening to you, and you were talking about people wanting to scale, I'm not anti-scale, but I think the question you mentioned ego, which I think is really important. I think the question that is not being asked is a very simple question. And the question is, why?
Mm.
Why do you want to scale?
Mhm.
Out of that may come a very, very good reason. But I suspect, and I think it's probably what you're saying, that a lot of the reasons people want to scale is ego driven. And that's
Right.
not a good
Right.
motivation.
Right. Yes, and I'm certainly, and I don't want to sound like I'm anti-scale either. I want to help people scale.
Mm,
I want to help them scale sustainably. Right? That
mm,
this idea of scaling and growth, we're not going to burn out all of the salespeople, right? That we're replacing salespeople every
yeah,
month because we've pushed them
yeah,
so hard. I
yeah.
want to help people scale in a way so as, if it's whether it's the husband or the wife that owns a business, and that their home, that their family at home is not crying for them. When are we going to see you?
Mm,
Can we maybe take one vacation this year? Like the children know their parent, father or mother, they
mm,
know them, and that the parent can be there for important moments. It's a sustainable scaling process, and it's very calculated. And so the why then becomes, if the why is at X amount of revenue, when we reach 50 million in revenue, I want to sell this business. That will be the right point that it will be attractive in my industry for a
mm,
buyer because I'm ready for an exit. Or at such and such revenue allows me, perhaps it's much smaller and we're getting to the $2 million range. And at 2 million, I can
mm,
hire a qualified manager to do 80%
mm,
of what I'm doing as the business owner so that I can free up my time to create and have these brilliant ideas for our next chapter. When it's calculated in that way, those are all,
mm,
I think, are appropriate goals. And again, it's how do we look at our business and how does it fit into our life? So when we're calculating that way, or if it's a goal, I mean, I've seen people, they want to grow their business and become less involved in the operations because they're starting a foundation for a cause they truly believe in. That's a wonderful reason to scale, right? So these are all because there's intent and there's a strategy, and that's sustainable scaling. But if it's just my competitor has this number, this revenue number, or if it's I've set this goal and I have to achieve it and I will do anything to get there, even forfeiting my profitability, that to me is a form of that achievement drug that we talked about earlier, right? I have to reach, we have to be at 80 million in revenue in the next 2 years, because that's the drug that I'm pursuing, right? That
Mm.
will mean achievement to me. That will validate me as a business leader. And it all goes back to that sort of ego, that it's that validation of hitting that goal. And that's where we see people running into the health problems and the divorce and all of the things that can come
Mm.
along with when we as entrepreneurs choose the achievement drug over this other model.
It seems to me that a lot of people are running in the wrong direction. They're running really, really hard in the wrong direction. And when you're running in the wrong direction, you can never reach your destination. And because the destination is never reached, they just keep running because they think, well, it must be around the next in the next corner.
Mhm.
And I know I understand some of the work you do is actually getting people to start with what their own life goals are. But I don't think anyone ever starts a business in that way, by the way.
I didn't.
But
Admittedly, I didn't.
no, no, I mean, nobody does, and I think that's cool. I mean, if you're 25 years of age or whatever, you want to start a business. I mean, and you said this earlier. You you know you have to start a business that there's a market for, and you will try several businesses, and then you'll strike because now you find. So I think in those early years, I believe it's slightly different. You will have to work very hard. You'll have to do lots of
Yes.
things. I think, and I heard you speak about this before, but it's like the treadmill. Uh, and people don't realize yet a certain amount of work is required to get a business to a certain point.
Yes.
But that's I
Right.
can't live the rest of my life the way. At some point in time, I have to go. I've gotten the ball rolling. Now it's time
Mm.
to manage it different. But this question of what do I want for my life at some stage, I think everyone has to reflect on that, or you'll just head in the wrong direction.
And it can sound a little, hoodoo voodoo, like, oh, we're starting
Mm.
businesses based on what we want for our lives. And
Yeah.
I don't think
Mm.
that there's many rooms of business owners sitting around chatting
No.
about, oh, when you started
Mm.
your business, what did you want for your life? I mean, I recognize it sounds a little far out, and maybe to some people with established businesses sounds a bit unrealistic. The way that I present this idea to people, particularly if I'm speaking live to an audience of business owners, I'll ask them to envision, to picture their next goal. And immediately something comes to mind, in their business, what they're trying to accomplish.
Mm.
Everyone kind of has a feel for, oh, we're trying to do
Yeah.
this. And so that's the easy one. And there's a bit of excitement, almost buzz in the room when I say that piece, right? You can feel the mood. And but then I ask them to picture themselves, like outside looking at them as a person, picture themselves when they reach that goal. And the mood plummets in the room. An experienced speaker, you can feel, even if there's no people aren't
Yeah.
talking, you can just sort of feel this weight in the room. And, of course, then I go on to talk about, if the goal is X amount of dollars, and when we reach that goal, I'm going to buy the boat that I've been wanting. But
Mm.
then you realize, when you picture yourself when you've hit the goal, that if I am the exact same person when I hit that goal, I'm not going to have time to be on that boat. Or
Mm.
I haven't lost the 60 pounds I meant to lose, or I'm still not, spending time with my children. Or we just so rarely think of ourselves when we're picturing goals for our
Mm.
business. And so when I ask people to do both, suddenly it's this sort of jolt where people recognize, oh, while I'm working on this goal for my company, if I'm not working on me, if I'm not working on what I want for my
Mm.
life, just getting to that goal, right? Just getting the boat isn't actually going to bring me happiness, because I'm not going to have any time to be
Mm.
on the boat if I keep
Yeah.
going at the pace I've been going. So when I teach it
Mm.
in that way, I think it sounds less, sort of a this silly, oh, pick a, the business revolves around your life, and rather helps people to really recognize we have business goals. Why don't we have the same goals for ourselves, for who we intend to be
Mm.
when we reach that goal? It's powerful. It's really powerful.
It is. I would say I always encourage people to have goals for every area of their life. So to have goals for their family, their relationships with their partner, their children, their community. To have goals for their health, for their spirituality, for their financial goals, but financial goals independent of your business. But to look at the whole spread of life and of goals, because the wonderful thing I did many years ago when I realized the things that drove me that were important, I realized that four things drove me in life, and one of those
Mm,
was wealth. So in the
mm,
wealth bucket, there's business and investment. But the
sure.
interesting distinction for me was, but it was one of four areas of life that are really important to me.
Mm,
And therefore, my life becomes complete when I fill all of those four buckets. One of them happens to be wealth and business, but
mm.
if I could have 10 times the size of the business I have, but if I wasn't filling those other buckets, I just I would have an empty life. But the thing about it is, I mean, you when you came to the crisis in your life, you said it in your late 30s, and it struck me because at one point in time, the crisis for me was sitting in my office thinking I was going to have a heart attack. And I
Mm,
think I was maybe 38 or 39 at the time.
mm,
And when
mhm.
you were speaking, I'm just wondering why. I mean, are we
Yes,
stupid or something? Like,
yes,
why does
yes.
it take us? Why does it take us so long?
So
Well,
long.
quick things. Why does it take us so long to realize? And why did both of us have to push ourselves to a point of almost physical and mental breakdown before we woke up and learned the lesson? Like, are we slow learners?
Yeah, isn't it a funny thing to be, I'll say this for me, and it'll sound maybe a bit prideful, but to know you're so smart and at the same time know how very not smart you are in
Mm,
that sort of instance, right? Because you're pushing yourself for a company that is successful. So that's the
yeah.
sort of proof, right? Oh, I know what I'm doing.
Mm,
And at the same time, to just not notice when your body is trying to tell
mm,
you, hey, excuse me, I need a little attention here. And I take it a lot back to, in my instance, and I shouldn't speak for everyone, but so much of it was that I didn't actually recognize that there was another way. I
yeah.
had this pattern of pushing so hard for everything, and it had gotten me to where I was. It worked, right?
Mm.
I was
It
running
has
a
been
company that was
successful. Yeah.
successful. So if it's working, why change it? And it was the only way that I knew. And these ideas
Mm,
of, when the books like the 4 Day Work Week, and these
yeah.
different ideas how can we actually slow down to speed up, there were ideas that maybe I had heard, but I was resistant to because what I had done had served me well, and I was still
Mm,
pursuing that achievement drug. It was very much a part of my identity. So, going from a phase in life where I was saying, if you were to ask me at that time, "Oh, how are you? How are things?" "Oh, I'm so busy and I'm doing this A, B, C,
mm,
D." Right? That to me was, sort of the badge of honor because I'm so
mm,
very busy. And
mm,
now I love to be say, "Oh, I'm not up to much. How are you doing?" Knowing full well I'm trying to do 1,000 things, but I'm trying to learn to take pride in
yeah.
saying that, I don't have that many things, rather than the pride being, "Oh, I have a million things that I'm working on." It's a big shift in mindset. And so, yeah, it's that progression of being taught achievement,
Mm,
kind of getting addicted to the achievement drug. It served me. So, the best way for me to move forward and become more successful is to do more. And I think that progression, which is very logical and very clear when you look at it from childhood all the way up to age 38, it makes sense because it's what we know and it's what served us. But then when you have that aha moment like I had in my doctor's office that you had in your
Mm,
office,
mm,
what comes of that shift is really quite spectacular. And I wish for everyone to have that shift in mindset. I just don't wish for everyone to have to go through what I went
mm,
through or what you went through to get there. But
mm.
that you're right. It is a season. There's a hustle season when you're first starting something
Yeah.
new. There is a hustle season, but recognizing the most important thing is it's a season and not a lifestyle. And when we make that distinction, then we can start to see things a little bit differently.
I think that that's very well put, describing it as a season, because I think when you talk about Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Week, my reflection on that is that nobody builds a successful business. Maybe not nobody, but I've never met anyone who's built a
Yes.
successful business working a 4 working a 4 hour
Exactly.
week. I know many people with successful businesses, and they worked enormously hard for a long period of time to build those. That seems to be the formula. I don't have a different formula. But when you build that successful business, and I think certainly once you get beyond that, maybe it's about 3 million or whatever, when you get onto a certain point, you can then turn that into a business where you can work 4 hours a week,
Right.
because now you can delegate and you can build structures and you can employ a team, and you can employ a general manager or a COO or whatever.
Mhm.
And that's the transition that most people I know don't make. But likewise, when I was growing up, the examples, my father was in business, and when I look at business owners I knew then, so that was my teaching, my example. They all worked very, very hard always. That was what people did. There was no question that you would do anything else. So I think that was so ingrained in my soul, that the notion of not just busting your gut all the time. I probably had to hit a wall. And then when I did hit the wall and realize I needed something different, I was cautious about that, because what would people think? How would
Yes.
people look at me? He doesn't work that hard anymore. It's that maybe there was shame attached to it, but so hopefully part of the value of having this conversation is, I think hopefully someone is a little bit shocked by you saying, well, maybe you shouldn't scale your business, but maybe you're giving them permission to go, that's actually that's actually what I think.
I'm going to share a brief story that just sort of amplifies what you just said because I think there can be a bit of shame involved with
Mm,
these crazy ideas that I'm putting out there. When you think of people who have retired and suddenly feel a lack of purpose in their life
mm,
because they went to work every day and now they're not working. Who am I? What do I do every day? And I think that can happen with business leaders as they're able to not have to be involved in the day to day so much, which is or should be the ultimate goal. But I'll share this with you briefly. I had a client, very successful, and he'd had multiple businesses, and I was involved with his most recent one, and we're doing quite well. And he'd again had a history of each business he had worked in, really doing well. And but whenever I would call his office, he was golfing. I mean, I really would wonder, did he ever go to his office? Because anytime
mm,
I called, he'd be on the golf course. And I remember having so judgmental, but I'm admitting it.
mm,
I remember having the thought, does this man ever work?
mm,
And they were my client when I got my medical diagnosis and was forced to sell my company.
mm,
And so, of course, through that transition to the new ownership and all of these things, that's also when my mindset started to shift. And I realized, oh, this man has created a successful company that doesn't require him to be there very
mm.
often because the systems are in place. I mean, all the things that I was working with companies to create, it just
Yeah.
came full circle. Oh, he's able to golf anytime the weather is good because he's done what he should do in his company, and I should be
Mhm.
looking up to someone who's golfing whenever they can, rather than this sort of natural judgmental tone I had of, "Does this man ever work?" Isn't that the ultimate goal, right? He loved to golf. He was in his 60s, he had worked his whole life, and if he wanted to golf, good for him. But it was my mindset that had to shift and realize I'm not much of a golfer
Mm.
myself, mainly because 'cause I'm not very good at it, but, and I pretty much just like to do things I'm good at, but if golf was my passion, shouldn't I want as a business owner in my 60s that if I wanna
Mm.
golf whenever the sun is shining, isn't that the dream? Isn't that the goal? Isn't that what we do this for?
Yeah.
And so that was a huge transition in my life, just about one man playing golf.
It's really interesting. I run a mastermind group called the 1 Hour CEO, where I teach business owners the mindset and the strategies of how you remove yourself, or you strategize yourself into that position where you can play golf all the time if you want to. But I think that, and so there's particular things within the business people have to do to achieve that.
Right.
But the most important thing, I think, is what we're pointing to here, is you have to have the concept that that's possible. And if, like you
Yes.
and I, 20 odd years ago, whatever, if your mindset is that I'm an achiever, I must work, 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 then you never see you see that possibility.
Yes.
So I think that was a moment of awareness for you when you go, this man has a successful business, probably has a great team, and he gets to play golf. So now no matter what I believe, now I know that's possible because that's what he's doing.
Mhm.
I think they're wonderful examples. And you can teach people all the strategies you want, but they won't work unless they get that mindset shift of realizing that I've done the work, and
Yes.
now maybe it's time for the 4 hour work week.
Yes. Number 1, it's possible, and not just
Yes.
because we've seen it, because someone posted it on LinkedIn is very
Yeah.
different than me seeing the actual financial statements of a company and personally
Yeah.
knowing the owner of that company.
Mm.
Number 1, it's possible, and number 2, which is as difficult to get in our minds as high achievers, number 2 is
Mm.
that if I work less, my value doesn't diminish because so
Mm.
much of our identity can be tied up in our business. So the more we're
Mm.
there, the more it fuels that part of our identity. So it's achievable. It is doable to work less and be involved in other things we're passionate about, whatever those may be. And two, that when I do that, I'm not decreasing my value or my contribution.
Mm.
Rather, I'm increasing it because I'm able to contribute to my community or my family or anything that I'm also passionate about in addition
Mm.
to this business that I've started. So it's so much mindset and it's so much of things that we aren't talking about very much.
One things I've discovered when I work with CEOs is that it and I speak from my experience because I've done it, and it's a transition. So it takes time as people step back, and you've been, running a business for 30, 40 years, or whatever. It's not reasonable to expect that you can finish that on a Friday and on Monday morning have your life fulfilled doing other things. You have to realize, and you have to be conscious about it, but you will transition slowly. For me, it certainly took a couple of years, but you will transition slowly. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I know you talk about this notion of love it or list it, which is, I suppose, if you're not in love with your business, is that what you're saying? If you're not in love with your business, it's time to get out of it. Um, how do you define that in a conversation with someone?
Sure. So yes, this love it or listed idea. I don't. It's a popular real estate show here. I don't know if you have it there, but people
No,
they'll
we
go into
don't
the
know.
home and they fix up. Okay, so I'll tell you about it briefly.
Yeah.
They'll fix up the home, and
Mm.
then the owners come back and they either fall in love with this home
Oh,
that's
I
now
see.
been renovated, or they list it, they sell it. And so I
Yeah.
take that love it or list it to businesses to say, here are the things we do the analysis, and here are the things that need to change. Here are the strategies that will
Mm,
get your business to where you're telling us you want it to be, your
mm,
how many hours you want to work, what your personal financial goals are, business financial goal,
mm.
what are all of the elements, and here are the strategies. This is what it will take to get you there. And so we'll run that play and get the business there. And once we get there, then you decide, because they're the same strategies, by the way, that it would take to make a business sellable. Most
Mm.
often, any business analysis, yes, we do
Yeah.
exit succession planning, but to make it
Mm,
sellable is also usually aligned with the changes that need to be made just for it to be a well
mm.
functioning business. So we take them through that process, and when we get to that end and say, okay, we've done everything, we've completed all of the strategies, then most likely they're going to re-fall in love with their business because it's not as
Yeah.
stressful, it's not the strain on their time and their energy. Or if they say, boy, you've really gotten this to a great place and now I
Mm.
can sell it for X amount of dollars, let's do it. But they have the
Yeah.
choice. And that's so, so important, because so many business owners wait until they do have a health problem or a major crisis in their life
Mm.
before they think about selling the business. So we want to do that love it or list it process to get it to the place that once it's there, it could
Early
be
on.
sold any day. You could sell it today, you could sell it in 10 years, but you've got the strategy and process in place. So yeah, that's the love it or list it philosophy.
I remember all those years ago after I didn't have a heart attack. I thought I was going to have it. I remember going to my doctor and in the office and him examining me and going, Paul, your heart's perfectly healthy. And I'm going, how could it be? Like I'm having all these problems. And he goes, no, your heart's
Mhm.
perfectly healthy. And as I was putting my shirt back on, he says to me, um, Paul, do you think you might be stressed? Now,
Oh,
uh, it's kind of going obviously, but it wasn't obvious to me. So I remember
right.
driving home that evening from his office and thinking, "Ah, that's it. I'm stressed. Wow, how didn't I see that?" And then the next realization was I'm stressed because of the business. So I thought, I'm stressed.
Mm.
The business is the problem. I need to be gone from the business. It's a long time ago. At the time, I didn't have the resources, and it wasn't feasible for me at that stage to just sell the business and retire. So it was like, what do I do? So I remember and for a couple of weeks, I pondered this thing of, well, I'm stressed. The business is the problem, so I need to separate myself from the business. And then the aha moment for me was that the business wasn't the problem. How I ran the business was the problem. And it sounds to me like that's the realization that you bring to people. You've fallen out of love with your business, but your business is not the problem.
I find, at least in my own life, that stress, because I have this achiever mindset, stress will
Yeah.
follow me wherever I go if I'm not mindful of that. I called my sister one day. This is before I sold the business, and my sister, also all of my siblings are or have been entrepreneurs at some point. It's just
Mm.
the nature of our family.
In the blood.
We think it's normal.
Mm.
And so I
Mm.
called her, and this client, and I'm just really stressed about this and this and this. And I said to her, maybe I just need to move to an island. I'm a warm weather gal, so I said maybe I just need to move to an island and work in a snow shack, right? Because it would be no stress.
Yeah.
And my sister said to me, this is my older sister, and in her wisdom, she said, but what you would do is then you'd become the manager of the snow shack. And then you would get an idea that you should open a snow shack on every island. And then you'd start a snow shack franchise. She
Mm.
said, that's just
Mm.
who you are. And
Mm.
I will never forget those words, because she was right that I could run off to an island and run a snow shack,
Mm.
but it wouldn't actually take care of the problem. The problem was how I was managing stress and how my achiever mindset would manifest in just about every area of my life. And so that was another eye-opening moment for me, was that it's within us, and how we can exit, but what are we running to? Because wherever we go, we'll be there. And that was something, I don't know why that seemed to be such a
Yeah.
far out concept for me, is that I'm going to be wherever I go. And so it's me that I actually need to do the most work on. It's a bit of an eye-opening idea, because again, with achiever mindset, I could say, like I was saying, I don't golf much because I only like to do things I'm really good at. That idea is going to follow us into everything. Starting a new hobby, if we
Mm.
don't say, "It's okay if I'm not the best at this," right? We have to be able to do that as high achievers, or we'll turn every hobby, every idea will turn into something that we must be the best at, right? The Olympics of knitting, right? That's the sort of,
Yeah.
for every hobby. I collect stamps, right? And I've had to let that be something that very, or else I'd be joining every society and be at every conference for stamp collectors. You just have to say, some things it's okay to not be the best at.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a home in Spain, and there's a beach club there that we go to occasionally. And I remember a number of years ago sitting in the beach club, and I was very familiar with it. I'm lying there, and I'm very relaxed, looking at the ocean, just chilling, and my mind is looking around this beach club, and I'm looking at how many beds are laid out on the beach. I know how much they charge for the bed and the umbrella. I'm looking at the restaurant, and I'm going, and I know they open. I can't, let's say they open in April and they close the end of October, and I'm doing the maths in my head about what revenue they're likely to bring in and whether it's a viable business or not. So I get that idea that, and I think that it's really useful to be aware of that. That if that is your nature, wherever you go, you'll bring it with you. Uh, I think that's a really, really important point here, because you what your sister was saying to you is you can't get away from being Panda. This is what you will always do. So, and I would agree with that. That's my nature also. So then the question that comes from that, being aware of that, what are the practices and awarenesses we need to have in our lives to balance that, so that we don't, go from the frying pan to the fire, as we say here, so that you don't just go and build another business and find yourself back in the doctor's office.
A moment in my life that it's seemingly silly but was very impacting. I had a vehicle and it was acting up a bit, and the company that I was working consulting with at that time, they because of the kind of company it was, they actually have mechanics on staff to
Mm,
service all of their hundreds of pieces of equipment. And
mm,
so I had said something about the vehicle. And so the owner walked me to the car and said, "We'll get one of the guys to check that for you, next time you're here," which was so
yeah.
kind. I'd been working with this company for maybe 8 years at that point, and so we were all friends. And he said, and I quite liked the vehicle that I had, but he said, "Why don't you just get you a new one?" And I said, maybe I will. And he said, and he just sort of said it in passing, but again, those moments that we never forget. He said, "I mean, what do we do this all for anyway?"
Yeah.
Business owner to business owner, right? Just
Yeah.
standing in the
Yeah.
parking lot. What do we do this all for anyway? You want a new vehicle?
Yeah.
Get a new vehicle. And I thought, he's right. I could just get a new one, right? And
Mm,
and maybe that wasn't the thing I was passionate about at that time, but when he said, "What do we do this all for anyway?" That
mm,
really hit me. Now, keeping in mind, this is before my medical diagnosis.
mm,
And,
mm.
again, these little seeds that get planted, we act like
Yeah.
transformation happens overnight, but it's a series of things. And I think that might be the piece of going really deep and saying, but what are we doing this all for anyway?
Mm,
And that really, I think, ties everything that we've talked about today. It ties this idea of, are we pursuing business goals for ego? Do we recognize that we can be busy for a season, but we don't want to make that a lifetime?
mm,
The achievement drug, right? Is that what we're doing this for the credentials, for the
mm,
recognition, for the sort of respect that we feel like we need from our peers? What is it all for anyway? And when we really dig deep and say, why am I doing this? Why am I
Mm.
pushing myself this hard? Or why do I want this particular revenue goal? Is it for the business or
Mm.
is it for me? These different things can kind of all be summarized in this idea of what is it all for? And it's an uncomfortable question, but when we get to the root of what is our key motivator, particularly as a high achiever, sometimes we can be a bit surprised. And then when we recognize the motivator, then it's not toning down who we are. Don't ever try to tone down a high achiever and
Mm.
just say, "Oh,
Yeah.
just sit back and relax and enjoy the ride."
Mm.
That doesn't resonate with a high achiever. But a high achiever can do an awful lot of analysis, right? And we're going to get to
Mm.
the bottom of it. And so if we recognize the motivation and then say, is this motivation aligned with what I truly want? That's where a high achiever, I think, can make those self
Mm.
adjustments, not to tone down who they are, tone down their achiever drive, but really say, is this connected to what I truly, truly want? And if
Mm.
not, then we can self adjust to say, I'm just going to use this drive to get me to what I truly want, regardless of what people's perception may be, or this
Mm.
ego, or this revenue number, kind of dismissing all of those things because we actually can connect to what we're truly, truly looking for.
I think that's probably the most powerful question that's been asked in the past hour. And I think I think the two things you said there that really strike me. I think for any entrepreneur or achiever, no matter what it is, you could be in school. I mean, anyone with
Yeah,
that who's pushing themselves, I think to recognize that that is your nature. So don't try and fight. Don't try and be something else
right.
because that is your nature.
Exactly.
But I
Right.
think if you always ask yourself the question, what am I doing this for? Then at least you will point yourself in the right direction, and it
Right.
will help retain balance in your life. I think if someone was listening to this podcast and all they did going forward was ask themselves that question, I think that would be a huge, a very, very powerful reminder. Uh, Panda, before I let you go, I know you're working on a book, The Panda Principle. Is that close
Yes.
to being available for us?
Well, I paused some writing because of all of the things that we were talking about. I felt a sense
Yeah.
of I was trying to do too much. And
Mm.
so I paused for almost 4 months writing, which is, again, that's hard for a high achiever, right? We want to get the book
Yeah.
done.
Mm.
So I think it'll be out by the end of this year. So the writing process for anyone's written, the writing process is, I don't want to say the easy part, but then there's a significant amount that happens after
Mm.
that with editing and publishing. So by the end of the year, you can expect to see the Panda Principles available on Amazon.
Excellent. I've spoken to many authors on this podcast, and it's such a big challenge to take on to write a book. So I wish you the very, very best with it. And
Thank you.
I look forward to when you have it complete. You might come back on and tell us all the
Absolutely.
secrets of the Panda principles. I would very much
Absolutely.
I would very much enjoy that. Panda, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I think of huge value to anyone listening. And I hope we gave them a moment to pause for thought, to reflect on who they are, what they want, and where they're going. So, thank you very much for coming in the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for being so open and candid about a topic that is not the most popular, but is perhaps the most impacting thing that we can be talking about at this time for entrepreneurs who are struggling.
Thank you, Panda. Words of wisdom.